Hey everyone, Jeremy Boutros here, and today we've got some interesting content. I'm going to be doing a examination or review of Rick Joyner's response to Chris Reed leaving Morningstar, and there's a lot to talk about within this. I'm going to try to balance, being really honorable, but also looking at the tremendous opportunity within the situation, the void of theology that's being implemented, some areas that are being overcorrected, and hopefully it'll help us. I think it'll help a lot of people. There's some tremendous opportunities within the victim space that we're going to talk about. I'm going to do, it's probably half of this video here. He talks about Chris Reed's process and the whole thing. So about half of it we're not going to watch. So, but I'm going to pause throughout and give time and space for some commentary, some much needed feedback. It was apparent to me how fast this exploded, and how many comments came in on different videos and the different stories. I'm not going to speak to necessarily the interplay within the stories of the people that are at Morningstar, that left Morningstar. I'm going to try to stay on the theological side because I think there's tremendous opportunity for us to gain. And I do want to preface this with I grew up reading Rick Joyner's books, Final Quest, and he's written many books, and I've enjoyed lots of his content. He's obviously a father in the faith in a lot of ways, but I think it's still healthy to have a dialogue, a healthy dialogue, openly for everyone about what to do within these situations, how they're handled properly, how they're handled improperly. What are our areas of opportunity? What are our guardrails in terms of determining fit for ministry, unfit for ministry? How do we treat victims? How are we putting processes in place for victim advocacy? Even their whole idea of restoring a leader. We're going to talk about a lot of these things because, you can't just sugarcoat church. You can't just sugarcoat people's lives. And it's apparent to me that there's certain individuals, and I'm not saying this particularly about Rick, but there's certain individuals that lead churches that have self-preservation as a primary tendency. And so you're willing to do or say anything to keep the status quo. I'm not saying this about Rick. But it's apparent to me that there's a lot of other organizations that do this on a regular basis, and it's probably more commonplace than not, unfortunately. And clergy abuse, some of the stats I learned from Katie, recent interview I did. She's a professional victim advocate. She said that clergy abuse is about 12% of the abuse that takes place. And in this case, I would probably classify Chris Reed's as clergy abuse, given the nature of what's being discussed. I'm not verifying that, or I'm not talking about, the actual incident in any way, but it sounds like it based on what Rick's saying, and that's really unfortunate. So, another case, another day. Seems like there's one primary one every week, but nevertheless. Let's dive in. I think you'll get a lot out of this. I did one on Mike Bickle's last sermon as well. It's a long one, but it's very needed. I encourage you to check that out. And I think this will be helpful. I don't want to break these up into small little ones because you lose the content, you lose the flow. So we're just going to do one big one, and you could pause it, come back to it if you need. So I hope this is helpful to you. I sure enjoy doing them, and I never thought I would be doing these, but my heart definitely leads me to want to provide more context and perspective within this tremendous opportunity here. So let's begin. This took place a couple days ago, September 1st, and we'll start with Rick's introduction. I'm just going to pause it along the way.
Clearly, concisely, as candidly and transparently, my view of the way things have unfolded in the last few days and the situation with Chris Reed's resignation and some other things. But, you know, these things are in process.
So Chris basically submitted a 1.5-page letter. He gets into some of it here, just for context. Resigning, the primary reasons of his resignation within that letter, it seemed as though it was based on another incident that happened with a volunteer / a police worker. There was 4 children involved, and that has brought into a lawsuit for Morningstar, and that was his primary reason for leaving. Afterwards, it seemed as though Rick and a few others, basically kind of said publicly the reason for, his leaving was not just that, it was other reasons. And so we're going to get into some of that here.
I will just tell you, but I want to keep you informed. There's some things we do know now, and we want you to know them as much as possible. And you trust anyone here not know about Chris Reed's resignation? Okay, there's one person. Okay. Well, half of this sermon is for you. Okay. No, because I want to give our perspective on some things. But anyway, we got a letter from Chris this week about his resignation from his position. It was a complete surprise to me. I should say it shocked me but did not surprise me. There were some ways when I'd seen some things that were indications to me something's not right here. But I often wondered maybe I overloaded him in dumping such a responsibility, and a complex one, where we're a pretty large, multifaceted ministry with a lot of details, a lot of stuff. And it seemed in one part that is just way too much for him. But now, these things I have shared with Chris, just so I am you. But what alarmed me even more was that in these letters, there was almost no regard for the church, no regard for the ministry, no regard for a lot of people. It was all about him and his future and what he needed to do. And I'm for that. I want him to have the...
It was very strange. He wrote the letter, and you can check it out. But he also gets into a little bit more of his process of exiting, with him talking about setting up a new website and already working on the new ministry. And it is so weird. After this letter was issued, he did a video in response because, it seemed like Rick kind of went after him a little bit publicly, saying he was deceived. And in that, he admitted to having a extracurricular relationship several years ago, and it's nothing to do with what's going on, but apparently it has lots of things to do with what's going on.
Brightest future he could have, but I did not feel that there was a shepherd's heart revealed. A shepherd lays down their life for the sheep and certainly has regard for them. I didn't feel like there was regard for me, for our board, any of this stuff, that we had entrusted a lot to him. And I don't think to just quit like that is what we ever need to do with anyone, with no notice. Something wasn't right. And almost, I heard from many people, many of you, there's something else behind this. And I felt the same way. Well, now I can say with confidence there was. And so anyway, also we do have a lawsuit that has been filed against us for something that happened with some of our.
So before he gets into the lawsuit, obviously Chris had a fiery exit, and he's going to get into the details of Chris's departure a little bit more. But it's commingled with this because Chris spent a lot of time emphasizing it in his letter. I don't want to do the news report stuff, but I'm just trying to fill you in.
Youth, young men, I believe it was one of the most atrocious, terrible things that we've ever had happen. But the accusations in the lawsuit were wildly untrue. I mean, way out of the box untrue. But one of our volunteers used their position, and they were not an employee of the ministry, but used their.
Before he continues in that, I just want to make a note. Rick's saying the accusations were wildly untrue. But later on, he makes a statement about the credibility of a witness and how you have to be eyewitnesses in order to verify and validate. So it would seem as though this is directly contradictory to what he's about to say. I know he's kind of saying like whatever's in that lawsuit, because I understand people can put ridiculous things in lawsuits, but pay attention to that as it comes up later when he says, eyewitnesses only, because in this case, he wasn't an eyewitness to these events.
A relationship or whatever, and some stuff happened with these young men that it was just awful. And, we need to face it and deal with it. Now, our lawyer sitting over here, I'm giving him a heart attack or a nervous breakdown so, with all the way I share some things. But I told him we're not going to look at anything, and he agreed with this. We're not going to look at anything at I shouldn't say anything, but we're not going to first look at situations for their prospective liability. We're going to look at them. We're going to do whatever we can to keep our people safe and to learn everything we need to learn from any mistakes we've done, any negligence, anything like that. The main thing we're doing is we don't want this to ever happen again to anyone. Okay, that's our perspective.
I appreciate that a lot, and I think very few get to this far in the extracurricular communication of protecting victims. One of the number one things that's apparent in every single one of these incidences is the lack of victim accountability, victim process, predator, teaching. There's very little framework here. You can say safety and security, but in this case, obviously the safety and security was the person actually is the perpetrator. And so there is a huge opportunity here for victim advocacy and proper training for the body. So we obviously want to get into much more of that later in another point, but it's apparent that the church in large doesn't really have an idea on what to do. Number one, they're not trained in predatory behavior. And number two, they really don't know what to do with the victims. So we can say safety, 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 but at the end of the day, it still happens. And Rick's going to say later on here, it's bound to happen anyway. It's going to happen, which, I agree in some ways is just too many cases, too many people, too many opportunities. It's going to happen with big, big organizations.
We want the truth. We're looking at this we need the truth. We're not going to, if we go to court, we're not going to be against these victims. We're not going to be on one side and them. We're on the same side. We want the truth. And do you understand what I'm saying? And we're not going to try to defend ourselves against anything that we think, hey, this may be true, accurate, something we've done, and we're looking. Now, we've had a number of people look at what we're doing, and so far we've never had a single thing where someone thought there was negligence on our part. Okay, by the way, if any of you are nervous, we got great insurance, covers everybody, should cover this in every way, but that's not what we're going to be looking at or concerned about first. We're looking at, we got to protect our people. We got to, keep this kind of thing from happening. And I'll be frank with you, in this day and time, that's almost impossible. You can do the best you can, stuff is going to happen. It is an onslaught of in my opinion, sexual perversion and sexual promiscuity and everything else that surrounds you almost continually. You almost are continually bombarded today by pornography. And the stuff that we would have called pornography just a few years ago is now everywhere you look. And, this is the world we live in. That's why one thing I want to know how to defend against such assaults, and I want to know how to heal people that have been afflicted. Somewhere around 2/3 to 3/4 of all women have been sexually assaulted. It's high. It's huge. I believe this about the same percentage of men have been. They don't want to talk about that because it deals with homosexuality and all that. They're wanting to say that's not an assault. They're now wanting to lower the age for accountability and things like this. We think it's madness, and we're going to fight against it. We're going to stand against it. And I tell you, we're not going to tolerate those from one sex going to the other sex's bathroom or locker room or showers or anything else. That to me is sexual perversion, is sexual madness. And, but that's.
I appreciate that he said that. And, the education piece really helps. There's a lot there to dive into in other videos. And there's professional victim advocates that have tons of resources on these things, because you can't just wing it and say, we hope to protect everyone. In this particular case, we have two instances. One is the case that they're bringing up with the individuals and the security officer volunteer. The other is Chris Reed's case in his extramarital relationship. And so both of those obviously would be within the umbrella of the church, but one specifically clergy abuse, maybe both of them, depending on the role of the volunteer worker.
Where we're going to be. We're going to do our best to defend all of our people, especially our children, from such things as this. And there are assaults constantly. But our policies and everything else, they're based first on protecting the people, not protecting ourselves. Not from lawsuits or anything like that. And that is our resolve. Now, in my opinion, we've been investigating the things that have been coming out in the news against Chris. We had done this before. And this thing you may have heard about him and this texting relationship took place, a couple of years ago or more. And, we looked into it as much as we knew how to at the time. We spent, Tom and I, several hours with Chris and the girl that was supposedly involved that had been an MSU student. She was not a young girl. She was just a few years younger than Chris. She was a lady, a woman. And they both, in every way we knew to ask the question, they said there had been no physical contact, just texts and things like this. And Chris had gone to his wife, Missy, with this, showed her his phone, showed her the text, and to me, in every way that we could find out at that time, he had done the right thing in responding to this.
So, Chris obviously went off on his own and, developed this, at this point, it's a texting relationship. Rick gets into the more details, supposedly, of what took place. The premise of what Rick is saying here is the criteria for evaluation of fit for ministry was based on confession and confession, ideology. The confession ideology, I think, is probably one of the weakest forms of truth and transparency and genuineness. Even our personal recollection of past events is skewed based on the feelings that we have. If we're hungry, our emotional well-being, our sugar levels, and then our perspective continues to change over time based on our desires, motives. In addition to, self-preservation is probably one of the number one things that comes up in terms of ministers. So Chris is in a situation where he relocated to, help out and run Morningstar in some ways. And, it seems like right out the gate, which we'll get into some of the timeline, Chris is, in this scandal. And, self-preservation would say you zip it up and you push forward and nobody will know. And it seemed like everybody took that bait, hook, line, and sinker. And because, if Chris were to be brutally honest with everything, maybe he wouldn't have ever been placed in that position. And according to Rick later on, he likely said he wouldn't have placed him there anyway. It's super interesting. And we're going to get back to the confession thing because, we're measuring the heart in these instances. And, you can use the word discernment, but the idea of like, okay, you have to have ultimate discernment on the situation. Are they telling the truth? Like you're walking around with a little barometer going beep, 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 beep. Are they telling the truth or are they lying, And so there has to be other mechanisms in place, especially, delayed, timed, visual is one where you can see someone play out life a little bit more rather than just take them at their word, because the propensities for gray truth, little white lies, is very strong in the midst of narcissistic behavior, because you want to preserve the status quo. You want to preserve everything you have. So Rick is saying they did this little criteria. He'll circle back around on this, but took them at their word. And then here we are.
Okay. But anyway, we felt responsible to take it to our whole board of directors. And if you don't know who our board is, I think we got one of the strongest boards of any organization I know of people who on a world-class level in many fields. They've seen almost everything. They've been, anyway, they're not going to shove anything under the rug. They're not going to, not examine everything. Chris came and presented to the board, and I thought candidly and all what had happened. His wife Missy came in, presented, and there to the same thing, and we all decided it still showed incredible naivety or something. It was just to have started such a relationship.
Maybe stupidity is the word. But so basically, instead of looking at this objectively for the sake of health, for the victim in this case. Maybe the affair partner. We don't know the context within that relationship. Was it grooming? Was it an extramarital relationship where they're mutual? We don't know, but what we do know is, based on what Rick said, is this is a student from the university, and Chris is about to be the president, and so it would fall under a very gray, very questionable category of potential grooming. I mean, you've got your spiritual authority, spiritual leader, who is coming on to you in different ways. And the idea of them self-professing before a board, here's my presentation. I hope you like me. I hope you like how I've kind of fixed myself and have done it right. I think is a really poor avenue to do that, especially someone who's going to be placed in leadership over hundreds, if not thousands of people, especially students. That is, it's hard not to use the word careless in a lot of ways, that it wouldn't be investigated more thoroughly. But Rick's putting a lot of faith and a lot of responsibility in his board, and we don't know what they did or didn't do. So maybe they did. Maybe they hired a third-party investigator outside of the church and vetted everything and verified everything. We don't know, and at this point we still don't know. But basically they made their presentations and everybody was happy.
Was incredibly unwise at best. It was a transgression, I believe. So he was put in a place of, parole kind of, where went on a process of restoration where he met with Tom, I think, once a week. And
simultaneous to this, there was an individual that did a video. They said they left at the same time. He was also promoted to be president at the exact same time. So maybe he was under a parole framework, but he received the promotion within the same time frame.
But because we believe in Galatians 6:1, where it says, "Brethren, even if anyone is caught in any trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of gentleness, each one look into yourself, so that you too will not be tempted."
So this is a cornerstone verse for Rick in restoration. And if there weren't any chapter breaks when Galatians was put together initially. And so if you go back just a couple verses, the framework for restoration is, brought on by the Spirit, and it's unto Christ for salvation. You just go back 4 verses. It is extremely troublesome to try to convey spiritual restoration with a physical job, a physical environment. I understand the idea, and I think there is some truth in the framework. Everything that's spiritual, God has the ability to restore. This is the nature of Christ. Alongside that, though, the emphasis is not to restore someone unto their job, unto their position, unto their office, even unto their calling. The restoration primarily coming from the context of those verses, not just pulling it out of context and just using the one, is restoring someone unto salvation, to the kingdom. And the most important thing, I think, to God in this context is if there's a transgression against him, that they're restored unto him. They're restored unto Christ. They get to work out their salvation. They get to be sealed under the day of redemption. They don't lose out on the opportunity to be with Christ. That's the restoration here. Now, where it becomes really gray is if you have a loose form of restoration where you can commit the most violent acts. You can commit the most heinous acts. You can groom people for decades. You can do absolutely horrific things, and then we use Galatians 6:1 to magically restore them. You understand that it gets really, really, really questionable when you've got someone in a spiritual authority, taking advantage of people, and sexually, spiritually, the list goes on and on. I want you to think about that for a second, and then we can just hit a button or put together a process where they meet with us each week, and then they can get their position back to be in charge of everyone. What we're leaving out in this Galatians 6:1 framework is the consequence of action. There has to be trust. There has to be rapport. There has to be the restoration of the body, the restoration of the emotional state, their mind, their will. That you can't just pray it away. You can't just hit a button and say it's fine. You can't just put them in a 12-step process and then everything's okay again. When someone violates the body, there's a process of healing for sure. But if somebody violates your body, are you going to put them in proximity of your body again? Every frame of healthy DNA in Christ's blood would say, no, preserve, protect, set apart, and this is not something that you should be perpetually confronted with. If there's a perpetrator in your midst, that they get to be restored back to their original state and get to commit these same acts against you because they were put through this process, and there has to be consequence. There has to be boundaries. And in addition to that, we also need to look at the stages in which Christ built rapport and built trust over time. And he started at the age of 12. And, at the age of 30, he was able to really, come into his fullness. 18 years of him building trust and rapport. Now, if he were to go commit, violent acts and then go through a process of restoration, how long would it take to build that trust and rapport again after having committed those acts? Christ was sinless, didn't harm anyone in that regard. So there's a very loosey-goosey process here, and we have a natural order of preservation and protection. If somebody commits a violent act against another person, maybe they go to jail for a long time, and so that process right here would negate Galatians 6:1 because they are now penalized with their time and their space, and they have to stay in jail because of this act. And so, and when we agree, this is an order that God's put in place. I think it's in Ephesians. We need these processes and procedures. And so there's much to be said here. I believe in the restoration of God, 100%. But in terms of boundaries, safety, protection, if you've got someone harming somebody in a very particular ways, do you put them in that situation where they can do it over and over again, or do you decide, no, you're not going to be in that situation anymore, and you don't just magically get your job back if you say the right things. But confession seems to be a hinge, a cornerstone that comes up later on. And it's very concerning that the entire mechanism of restoration and accountability is on confession. And so there needs to be other mechanisms, and I mentioned one earlier. But let's continue.
Now, this includes the words anyone, which includes anyone, and, caught in any trespass. get them back, restore them. And that means more than forgive them. It means get them back from where they fell. But, he was being prepared to take over the leadership of the ministry and all. Well, all that was put on hold during this process. And after a little time, we made him acting president, acting CEO, because that was part of the process. And I honestly wanted to see how he's going to behave.
So part of his restoration process is that he would be placed in charge of the church and in a leadership position over the school based on sexual immorality or an extramarital affair. Questionable, very questionable. Potentially putting other people in harm's way. And that's evident here. And I get Rick's process. He's about to explain it. Leadership is a servant position first. You're serving the church. But in this regard, he's being promoted over people and with spiritual authority. And he just had a recent, incident. So do you put him in front of more people to see if he's good now? Questionable, very questionable. And again, I don't know about the board's process. I don't know about Rick's process here. Restoring Chris to a spiritual, context with God, totally. But restoring him, putting him in front of more people after he just committed an offense against someone, against his wife, against his family, very questionable.
When he gets authority, is he going to do another stupid thing like this? But that was part of the process. Some people have a concept of ministry that if you put someone in ministry, that you're exalting them, you're lifting them up. True New Testament biblical ministry is the opposite. It's the opposite. And I believe I have seen people put in ministry as a part of their restoration process. True ministry, which is sacrifice, taking up your cross, learning to serve others, it really helps them.
The big piece here that I think Rick fails to really talk about in this particular video, and maybe he has much other content on it, is how are we protecting that girl? How are we protecting that victim that got caught in this situation? Was it grooming? How are we protecting her? And how are we protecting the other people that it might happen to if he is still on the prowl and not healed and not restored? He doesn't speak to that, and that's a big problem. So part of Chris's restoration is get out there in front of more people, including people like the one you just took advantage of. Very questionable, very, very questionable. And I think if he sat on that for a little bit longer, I think Rick would realize that people were put in harm's way with this process, and there should be other mechanisms in place when you go to try to restore someone where you're not putting people in harm's way. And unfortunately, we don't hear much about the victim. We don't hear much about the extracurricular affair. We just hear about Chris's restoration process. And I know that's part of, Rick's heart, just to restore people in that regard, but very, very big miss here. We hope that, it doesn't get worse from here. We hope that more people weren't affected after this decision was made.
To get through that. And we've seen tremendous results in a restoration process by doing that at times. But the concept of ministry today, to me, is not biblical. That this is some way you get everybody looking up to you. Now, it's because I think a lot of ministry today is not the real thing. I think there are very few true shepherds in the church today. They're professionals. It's a profession. not a calling. And it's a way for them to exalt themselves, to lift, to climb the ladder. And it's to me exactly opposite of what it's supposed to be. Now, how would you feel if when you were a child or something, and your dad had come home one day and said, "Family, I've really loved being with you and having you as my family, but I just got an offer from a bigger family, bigger paycheck, and so I'm going to go be their father now." What does that do to family? What does that do to your trust? And isn't this more what ministry today really has become, a profession? And I honestly do believe there are very few shepherds with a shepherd's heart that are really seeking to protect God's people as he said they would, which is lay down their life if they have to for the people. And so here we are. Now all this stuff comes out, and I go back and I think, well, wait a minute. This lady affirmed to us as strongly as I could imagine there was nothing physical in this relationship. She and Chris both affirmed that. The mother affirmed it. She didn't think anything had happened. We had to take their word that they cut it off, drawn a line, nothing physical had happened.
Now, this framework, he gets into it a little bit in IHOP, very much so, is I think it's Matthew 18, Matthew framework. And it's, when you have a transgression against, someone, you come to them, you present it to them, and he'll talk about more of this later. But this particular girl, there was a reason why, she was sitting down and meeting with them initially, and then kind of came out and, confessed to that relationship. And she was asked to, basically present to the board and her accuser or person who she's having a relationship with, Chris, to, say everything's okay. She's a student. She's in a very vulnerable spot here. We don't know if she was, coerced in these ways, because how genuine and how transparent can you actually be when the person who is having an extramarital affair with you in different ways, or maybe grooming you in different ways, ask for your true, honest, genuine confession of the events, and are they continuing? I don't know if that's the best environment for them to self-testify within the organization that they were taken advantage of potentially. It's not necessarily the best environment to get true, honest, genuine response. It would be much different if the individual who Chris had the extramarital relations with went with a victim advocate and a third-party victim advocate, and then they were able to speak to these matters rather than, well, we took their word for it. They both said everything's fine, everything's good. And here we are today, realizing everything wasn't good. Rick is about ready to realize that he was lied to.
Well, now I can say with a lot of confidence that's not true. Neither one of them were telling us the truth then. Okay?
And I gotta say it, this framework of confession-based restoration is not the way to go. Literally, there's so many. We can do it without being overtly intentional. We can mess up our confession without being overtly intentional. Like, I'm not just saying like someone's like lying straight out, just lying. That can happen. But even the way that we try to re-perceive and retell ourselves what happened in the past through our lens of perspective, our motivations, our hunger levels, our values, as they change, our testimony changes. Literally, you could tell the same story every single day for a year, and it'll be a different story every single day slightly. And then at the end of the year, it might be completely different. The idea of the confession base is very loose, and it's very weak, and you end up with situations like this.
It appears, and I say there's a lot of evidence, and it's mounting that yes, there was physical stuff that happened. Maybe not intercourse, maybe it was not sex like one of our former presidents defined it. He did not have sex with this one. I say he did. That's me. I would say that's sex. But you know what I'm saying? Read between the lines or interpret some of this. And, I think stuff happened. That's where I am.
So, would a third-party investigation have revealed this? Perhaps. Would if the person who Chris was seeking these relations, if they had a victim advocate, would this have come out and Chris never been placed in a place of presidency? And most importantly, would Rick have still promoted him to be in charge of his flock of the church and the school if he knew that he had just had an extramarital affair and he was grooming people? Perhaps. Obviously it's all suggestive. I don't really know any of the facts. This is very, it's very concerning that we just did the Galatians 6:1, get him through the door. We don't even know how long it lasted. And then, details emerge because someone got caught.
Now, and all I can say is the evidence is mounting. And I don't know where it's going to lead, but we're going to not cover up anything. And because some things were said that they weren't, now we think we've got to tell the truth of.
I appreciate that comment. However, how can one ministry who, has their own self-interest naturally for preservation, how can they do their own proper investigation? I would say that's extremely difficult. That's a very difficult proposition. Now, Rick's heart here is we're going to be able to do self-preservation, and we're going to get to the truth, and we're going to solve it simultaneously. And if he's able to pull that off, I would say that'd be closer to a miracle, because inherently it's self-preservation. You don't want to light the whole house on fire if you can prevent it. But I'm not saying Morningstar is going to make the bad choice here, but a third-party investigation would actually get to the facts and be unbiased, because working within the system, there's definitely an inherent bias to keep things at the status quo. Hence, the lack of talking about the victims and the victim protection and the victim process here.
About it. We cannot cover up the truth, okay? And we want to find the truth. But, evidence, something can be submitted as evidence in court, and it passes the test to be submitted as evidence, but that doesn't mean it's true either. It means it passed the test enough to be submitted as evidence, but the trial is going to have to find out whether it's true or not. Okay, so I'm saying we're in the process now. The evidence is mounting. We were lied to. And I would have never turned this ministry over to them if I had known what I know right now. I would have never, there's a lot of things I wouldn't have done. I was believing they were being honest and straightforward with us. They were not. That's what it looks like. And I will in some way convey to you that whatever we find out as much as necessary. I don't believe in getting into the details. You get what I'm saying?
So again, this is the bias piece that's coming out. Unfortunately, the details do matter, as Rick just said. Physicality was involved. We don't know how much. We don't know how long. those details actually really matter. And Rick saying, well, I'm going to be transparent, but I don't want to really get into the details. We can do better, Rick. We can do much better there. I understand it's not gossip hour, but this person was placed in charge of the church, and he was mistreating people in a sexual way. The details matter a lot. And I think Rick would realize this if he took a couple steps back and he looked at it from a victim's perspective. But this is self-preservation. This is he has an internal, motivation to keep, Morningstar intact, which I completely understand. But for the sake of everyone was put in a place of vulnerability, and worse things could have happened and may have happened. We don't know. I'm not wanting to speculate, but not good.
And I'm not going to go there. I don't want to go there. I don't want to slime people. But anyway, I feel like things were done that should have disqualified Chris from being made the leader of this ministry.
Very interesting statement coming from Rick here. Now, he just gave us the framework for Galatians 6:1. You can restore someone. If you're spiritual, you can restore them unto, he said, anything. You could restore him. Any transgression. But Rick is also pivoting here, saying that now Chris was actually going to be disqualified. He was disqualified in that context. If I knew these details, he was disqualified. Do you see how those don't stand up? One of them falls down. You can't be disqualified and restore someone completely. It's one or the other. Now, I think that's the tug-of-war that's happening here, because Rick was just wronged. And so he's like, you know what? It would have never happened, and I'm telling you because I'm looking at your eyes. I would have never put him here. He would have been disqualified. But then on the other side, he's like, well, I want to restore everybody. That's what the Bible says. Restore everyone. Even though my framework of the restoration there is the spiritual unto Christ, restoring them unto salvation, unto the Lord. It's not about putting them in a position of power after they just mistreated people and abused their power. Totally different situations. So Rick's got a conundrum here. He's got a really serious conundrum, because he just said he would disqualify Chris. So the restoration seriously has some bounds, if with certain conditions. I don't know. Maybe it's a likability factor. I don't want to get into that, the inner workings there of why Rick would say that he would be disqualified now versus we can just restore everyone, because that's what he said before. But it leaves us with a lot of gray. There's a tremendous gray. And I think it just comes to the, he was just wronged, self-preservation. But at the end of the day, I think Rick's kind of hinting at what we're all hinting at, which is you can't be put in a position of power if you just mistreated people. Restoration is a spiritual matter, restoring unto the Lord. But obviously Rick's got a line here where Chris is now disqualified. So that's interesting.
Would that I had the discernment. I didn't discern these things. I asked the Lord, because sometimes, things look one way and I understand they're another. And I did ask the Lord, you have to make manifest the truth in this, or any deception or whatever. And I trusted the Lord to do it. Guess what he did? I just didn't ask him to do it then. I forgot to say, do it now. And he happened to wait until this now. And but I understand that the way this whole thing is unfolded, I think we're learning things that are going to be.
I think it, maybe a little bit of a lesson here at PR. We're talking about someone potentially being groomed, taken advantage of, extramarital affair, and a quick departure of the pastor, CEO, president, and Rick Rick obviously is using his sense of humor to kind of break the ice, because this is stressful. This is tough, but this should be sober. This should be sober-minded. We are dealing with hurt people here at this point, and it's not really a laughing matter. Yeah, so that's going to come off really weird. It's going to come off really weird. You've got potentially a victim sitting in the stands listening right now to these jokes, and how we're learning. So that's tough, and it's just a delivery thing, culture thing. But it's tough for me to not see the sober reality of how serious this actually is.
Extremely helpful going forward, and I want to embrace them. I want to learn every lesson. I want to learn every way we were fooled. Even Paul the Apostle, to me, next to Jesus, he's the gold standard of a New Testament leader. Even he admitted to having been foiled by Satan. Okay, so I definitely was in this case.
So Rick has just referred to Chris likened to Satan in that paralleled story there. That's really hard to hear from the former person who is, what Rick says, spiritual son. So there's clearly a deep rift here. But you can't just base the process of restoration on the idea of discernment alone. Because we at that point are relying on God to give us real-time data, and we never miss if the restoration process is based on discernment alone. Rather, you see a pattern and a behavior, and you put in safety nets, guardrails, education, and protection instead of using discernment to protect people.
And I want to know why. I want to know how. But let's look at the standards here now of behavior. Now, I was really disturbed by the lack of what I call the shepherd's heart in the communications that went. The concern for others, for God's people, this is affecting them. And I've seen that movie before, and it really does not have a happy ending. I was concerned at the tendency to run from a situation. Warriors don't run from a fight.
Well, it was apparent in Chris's video he did like a 7-minute video the day after kind of Rick kind of threw him under the bus, that he started confessing to things. So Chris has got a lot to hide. He doesn't want everybody to know. He wanted to just go start another ministry. But the dirt, let's just say the bill was coming due, and the dirt was getting exposed. And so, Rick obviously feels like he was blindsided by this.
They run to the sound of battle, not away from it. I felt like there was a tendency to just abandon the people, abandon everything. I'm going to look out for myself. I'm going to do my ministry and whatever. That is not tolerable to me, to anyone I want to be on a team with. But as I've said here, and I do believe, as we just read, if a person is caught in any trespass, you are a spiritual restorer. And I've seen people that have the worst flaws that you can imagine, make the worst mistakes, the worst sin. Once they repent, truly repent, with contrition, admit it, and turn to God, He will, as deep as the enemy has gotten into our life, that's how deep He'll fill us. His strength is made perfect in weakness.
With the spiritual process, yes, but if you commit an act of violence against someone, You can't just ask God for forgiveness and say, I wish I would have never done it. I'm so sorry. Can I have the same spot of relationship back with you? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It is a different world, and we are not weighing the consequence of action here. We are simply saying the actions don't matter. It's just the spiritual restoration process that matters. What is the weight of justice within the actions? The actions have consequence. And I'm not saying that, everyone should be in a penalty box. We've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. But even God was, even God spoke about greater severity of sin. And there's levels to sin. There, when you read all the commandments, there's so many that go into, the severity. This is more severe than others. And, depending on how you treated someone, there was consequence that came with that. And sometimes it was your life in the Old Testament. We can't just do away with that. I'm not saying we restore the law. I'm saying every action has consequence. It's sowing and reaping. It just at its base nature. And so you can't run someone over with your car and then say, "Can I have the keys back tomorrow?" We all understand that that's not right. You would never give someone the keys back the next day. But in this case, not wanting to put words in Rick's mouth, but Rick's saying, if they confess and they're genuine, you give them the keys back. And right now, in criminal court, some cases they'd be, put away in jail for a long time. You don't give them the keys back, ever. And so very different reality here in terms of consequence.
So if all this was manifested, a tremendous weakness when it comes to ministry and ministry to God's household, I believe that it could be turned into a strength, a greater strength, okay? And I hold out for that, for anyone. Right now, I would, if Chris asked to come back here, I would say absolutely. We welcome you back. But you're not going to be in leadership. I mean, you've disqualified yourself from that.
Very interesting here, Rick, because you just said you could restore someone. I think he's personally offended. His emotions are burned. And so now Chris is disqualified. So again, you got to pick a lane. You can't have both. They can't be disqualified and you restore them unto everything. So clearly, Rick is still working this one out here. It's very personal. He's still working it out, but I think he's gonna come to it and realize there needs to be boundaries because of consequences. What are the boundaries that need to be in place? And in Rick's mind here, you can come join our church, but we're going to put some boundaries in place. That's more like it, Rick.
You can qualify yourself with your good behavior and really submitting to the process, and where we really know you're telling us the truth about everything. Anybody we will take back and work with and be happy to. And we would love to help Chris in that way. He needs help right now. And I think in spite of all this, and this is bad, I think he did some great things for us. He's really been a blessing. And there was 1 year, a few years ago, when I lost my two best friends, one to lawlessness, one to legalism. And one of them had been like a spiritual father to me, and he went off to the worst perversion and stuff. And I had to be the one to expose it. And I warned him that I would take it public if he left the restoration and deliverance process he was in, because he had become a predator.
The other thing that is worth mentioning, the incident with Chris that was brought before the board was never brought public. Nobody knew about it, even though the church was exposed. Rick, in this case, said, if you don't follow proper process and procedure, basically whatever plan he puts in place or with the board, that I'll expose it. I think this is a double standard here for Rick as well, because, he talks against, public discourse, public display, commentary. But I think it's kind of a last resort if you're not receiving the truth from, an organization, even though he said he was interested in maybe doing that. Would the incident have saved other people if it would have been publicly displayed, publicly talked about? Let me ask you this. If you're a member of Morningstar, would you have wanted to know that your president, pastor, leader was just in an extramarital affair within a month of him becoming president? I would like to say yes, you would want to know. And that's why we need a extra third-party investigation, because then you get the details on this stuff. You go to the Morningstar, you're going to read a report about Chris Reed just having an extramarital affair, and you're going to make a decision whether or not you want to sit under his ministry, because that's really important, because we know a little leaven leavens the whole lump. And if you have spoiled water in the well, it will spill out. And so the river of life that's flowing out of our mouth, if you're participating in immoral behavior, sin, that's going to, dissipate in your world. And I'm going to use the verse that Rick points out later, which is, don't cause a stumbling block for anyone. And this is a stumbling block for everyone who sat underneath Chris in his deception and potentially grooming behavior and immorality. They were exposed to a layer of harm, and that is a huge opportunity for a stumbling block.
And I felt like he was a danger. And when he left the process, we took it public. It's one of the hardest things I've ever done. My other best friend fell into this form of legalism, and he's one of the greatest men I've ever known. I'm talking about Reggie White. And Reggie was one of those...
I just have to mention this. Rick saying one of his other friends felt like he was a danger, but he didn't feel like it was important to tell anyone else about. Questionable. Because the other people are now exposed. The victims. We got to talk about the victims here. They are exposed to this danger, that self-professed danger. I don't want to hammer it on too much, but you get the point. If someone's a danger that you are aware of a danger, and you don't let other people know about it, are you helping the people around, or are you harming them?
There's some people, if the devil cannot stop you, he will get behind you and push you too far. It's like that happened to him. He was going too far in some things in pursuit of being right before the Lord. It's just not the way you do it. It was a certain legalism and things he was wanting to teach in our church that, according to the book of Galatians, can get you severed from Christ. I'm talking about doing the law of Moses for righteousness.
I think it's Galatians 5, and that goes into Galatians 6:1. This is the restoration to make sure that you're not severed with Christ.
Reggie called me one day, wanted to come see me. We spent a whole day together up in Moravian Falls. And he repented of all of that. He totally, I think, was completely restored and right before the Lord. And very soon after.
So Rick's putting full restoration on a good repentance. That's the same idea of the Catholics where, they go in and do confession and then you go, We're done. It's taken care of. That's different than restoration. We're talking about the forgiveness of sin, is what he just described. But restoration is not a confession.
After that, the Lord took his life because the Lord has his reasons, but I felt like he really repented and did everything and was restored. But it was still one of the most painful years I've ever experienced in my life. And there's a ditch on either side of the path of life. Lawlessness on one side and legalism on the other. And often if you fall into a ditch of lawlessness, when you realize it, you'll overreact and turn to legalism. Well, Reggie that I know of, had never fallen into the ditch of lawlessness. But he was just so persistent and focused. I think the devil got behind him, just pushed him too far for a while, and then he got back. But anyway, my opinion, Reggie really died right before the Lord, and he and I had a personal reconciliation. We had been best friends for a while, and but stuff happens. This kind of thing happened in the Lord's own inner circle. He's the best leader there will ever be on the planet. We're not going to be exempt from this over and over. Now we're facing again. To me, Chris was the closest thing I had to a spiritual son. I mean, I just thought the world of Chris, and in some ways I still think he had some of the best qualities for leadership that I'd seen in a young person like that. But he had obviously some things that came up and have now appeared that would disqualify him, and I think do disqualify him.
Interesting. So Chris, is perceived to be disqualified now at this point. There's just a few more minutes left of him talking about Chris in those situations. We won't go too much further, but let's proceed.
Now, what is God's standard? Acts 15, you know the story when the converts from among the Pharisees in the first century were going around telling all the Gentile converts they need to keep the law of Moses to be righteous before the Lord, to be acceptable to God. And Paul stood up against this. Others did. So they had this council in Jerusalem. And it says in Acts 15, starting in verse 23, the apostles and the brethren who were elders to the brethren in Antioch and Syria and Cilicia, who are from the Gentiles, greetings. Since we have heard that some of our number to whom we gave no instruction have disturbed you with their words, unsettling your souls, it seemed good to us, having become of one mind, to select men to send to you with our beloved Barnabas and Paul, men who have risked their lives for the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. Therefore we have sent Judas and Silas, who themselves will also report the same things by word of mouth, for it seemed good to the Holy Spirit and to us to lay upon you no greater burden than these essentials, that you abstain from things sacrificed to idols, and from blood, and from things strangled, and from fornication. If you keep yourselves free from such things, you will do well. Farewell. You say that's all you need to do. Just these few things, and you're good. Now, by the way, I know people, including myself, when I was first born again, I came to the Lord through a very supernatural experience, and I knew nothing about Christianity, Christ, or anything. And when I first read that, I said, wonder what fornication is. Well, I don't even know what it is, so there's no way I could be guilty of that. I'm just saying, I was about as guilty as I could have been. I knew it wasn't right somehow, but I didn't know why. And I was just ignorant and stupid. But I'm just saying, they lay out these things, these few things, and learn what fornication means. You do well. Just stay free of these. And, there's a different standard for leadership, for anyone who would be in ministry, for elders, deacons. And let's look at that for a minute. In 1 Timothy 5, the elders who rule well are to be considered worthy of double honor. I'm going to read on past this first part. It says, do not receive an accusation against an elder except on the basis of 2 or 3 witnesses. Now, as I understand, I'm not a Greek scholar, but I understand this word witness means eyewitness. It's a legal term for someone who's been an eyewitness. Now, there are
So his framework here for eyewitness is contradictory to his statement because he's using Chris's statement, of what took place in, obviously Rick didn't, see any of it take place. But he's saying, like, there's 2 or 3 witnesses. You're like, it was an extramarital affair. There aren't 2 or 3 witnesses. In most cases there aren't. And so, do you not bring something because you don't have 2 or 3 witnesses? Very questionable there. Lots of incidences just happen between, 2 individuals, one person committing an act against another, and you don't have 2 or 3 witnesses. So what do you do in that case? Well, there's not a verse that, Rick brings up about that.
Accusations against elders and leaders just swarm through the body of Christ all the time. You should not even entertain it. We're told right here, don't even listen to it. Now, there are people who say, I heard.
Very dangerous to say that. Don't even listen to a victim's testimony because there weren't 3 people that witnessed it. Just think about that for a second. I understand that people can be slanderous and you can just say whatever on the internet and you can make things up. And, there's got to be credibility. There's a victim advocacy process that defines that. But to just blanketly dismiss the testimony of a victim because there's not 3 witnesses or 2 witnesses is so dangerous. Yeah, we understand that the likelihood of maybe someone seeing criminal or civil prosecution because it was just their word against the other person's. But what about the validity of the victim? What if this person was being groomed, and there was a lot of SA going on? And are we saying that you just completely dismiss what's taking place for them because there aren't 3 people that witness it? Very dangerous to say you just throw it away. Who cares?
Heard this directly from this person who knew this person. What? It doesn't matter. If you were not an eyewitness, save yourself. There are consequences for slandering God's people or even carrying any kind of false witness you don't want to have. In fact, the Lord said it would be better not to be born than to be a stumbling block.
Remember the stumbling block piece. This can go 2 ways. If a victim comes to you and says, I was just taken advantage of, someone assaulted me, this happened, you're a stumbling block if you don't do something with that information, if you don't go seek help. But in Rick's comment here, he's saying, if you weren't an eyewitness, la 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 la, and it's really troubling. It's really troubling to hear. It's really sad.
Better think of that. That's how serious this is. And if you read the rest of that chapter in Matthew 18, he then tells you how not to be a stumbling block. If someone has sinned, go to them. Okay,
Oh, okay. So this is the framework that IHOP KC wanted to use on its victims. Um, if I'm trying to not get too graphic here, but if you have someone that is a spiritual leader, spiritual authority, and they're sexually grooming individuals, the framework that is being presented as the bedrock here of what to do is you need to get into a car, drive to them, and meet with your accuser that just continually assaulted you for however long. And you need to tell them that they've wronged you. You need to meet with them, sit in front of them face to face, and work out your quote unquote differences. There is so much wrong with that equation. And I could name 1,000 examples on how this biblical framework does not work blanketly across every transgression. It does not work. If someone violently assaults an individual, is Rick proposing that they need to sit down and meet with the person who violently assaulted them and discuss their transgression? I can't imagine that he would be saying yes to that. But because it's such a pinnacle verse that they've built this theology on for all blanket transgressions, we have big problems with that. Because I'm just trying to think very practically here. I have a family. What situations am I not putting my family in harm's way if they were just transgressed upon by another? And in a lot of cases, I'm not putting them in harm's way again. I'm not going to sit down and force them to meet their accuser, or sorry, their perpetrator. The person who just took advantage of them. Not going to happen. Not going to happen.
We see a brother or sister in sin, we have the responsibility of being their brother and sister and going to them to confront them with it. Doesn't mean we do it in a mean spirit or, anything. We need to do it in the right spirit, as Galatians, 6:1 talked about, in the spirit of gentleness. But we need to confront our brothers and sisters that we know are in sin. That's a responsibility. If they don't listen to you, it doesn't say.
And perhaps, like I said, this is not a blanket thing. Like maybe this works for some sin. Like, hey, I noticed you got lashing out in anger. Like, let's talk about it. I'm going to sit down with you and work this out. But when it comes to clergy abuse, sexual abuse, all these other things, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Not in any shape or form is this okay for you to go and then meet with the person who just abused you. No.
Go take it to the church. Go take it and spread it around everywhere. You should never tell anyone else until you've been to them personally.
That is absolutely wrong as well. Absolutely wrong. In situations like I just brought up, like IHOP, Kansas City, so many others, this particular one with Chris, you've got a lot of pieces that you don't know about. You don't know anything about. Unless there's a proper victim advocate and a proper third-party investigation, how in the world are you going to go and confront your abuser with their sin? To say not to talk to anyone else about it, it does not do any justice to the victim. It steals their voice away, and it dehumanizes them. It's solely built around the restoration of the individual, not the victim. We need to think about the victims here. And this is very, very concerning. This, again, is very concerning. And I don't think Rick really realizes that if somebody in his family was mistreated in a very, very bad, violent way, I would think that he would recommend going and speaking to authorities, speaking to someone who can put in protection and safety and boundaries and a process to restore the victim. Not, let's go meet with the person who just took advantage of you. Never. No, absolutely not. I fundamentally disagree with this criteria. It's simply built on the idea of self-preservation because, social media can be destructive. People can say bad things and, can be slanderous, and slander can, be bad, and we don't want people to gossip. And, I get that. And that's the individual's responsibility. However, someone was just victimized. What are we doing to protect them? Telling them to be quiet, muzzle their voice because they might speak out of turn? No, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
You are going to be in jeopardy, but if you've been to them and they reject you, you still don't take it to anybody else. You get one other person, and it isn't a person that you convince they're right, but someone else that has seen this or whatever and is in agreement that both of you go and seek to save them from this.
So round 2, if round 1 with your accuser doesn't work, go back for round 2. If the person who violently assaulted you, round 1 doesn't work, go back for round 2. No. Absolutely not.
It's seeking to deliver them, not just, reveal their sin or even just to challenge them, but it's seeking to save their soul, seeking to save them. And then if they...
So now it's about the salvation. Interesting, right? Because Galatians 5 is about the salvation, the restoration, right? Now, I would say this. If you've been victimized by someone, is it your primary job, according to the Matthew principle, to be their evangelist? No, it's not. No, absolutely not. Get to safety. Go and make sure that you can enter into healing. Go seek justice with help and security. Your job as a victim is not to go then evangelize the person who just victimized you. Oh my goodness, come on.
I won't hear the both of you. Only then would you take it to the church. And there's a procedure for doing that. And listen, when we pass on rumors, we are putting ourselves in jeopardy of being guilty of something worse.
So, as a pastor, in this situation, you could lose your job, lose your money, lose your position, lose your spiritual authority. There's a lot to lose. Their testimony is not going to be credible in this situation. They've just victimized someone. And if the victim's there to save their soul, rather than get help, there most definitely needs to be a victim advocate here, because I would even say the church at this point doesn't know what to do, because they don't have a mechanism in place to preserve the victim, to get help for the victim, and to put safety net and security around the victim and restore them. It's not there. It's not currently there. So they're vulnerable. And in the last resort the victim has is to finally speak out. It has to be through the right process and the right channel, because if not, their testimony will be tainted and things will be very difficult for them in the advocacy process.
Than whatever we're condemning in someone else. And it may be condemnable. And we have had in the past year this on a terrible level right here in this church, almost continuous. And people hearing from one person and just going out and telling other people and stuff. We don't want to do that in the body of Christ. If you don't want it done to you, because in Galatians we're told God is not mocked. Whatever we sow, we're going to reap. He takes it as mockery of him. Didn't he say, as you treat even the least of his little ones, he's going to take it as how we are treating him. I know you would. If somebody attacks your children.
We have to see that on both sides. If you're putting someone who's dangerous in front of kids again, then you're mistreating God. It is two-sided street here. But yeah, that's a good point for pastoring your mind, pastoring your heart. Don't go around spouting lies, for sure, totally. But we have victims here, and we need to protect their voice, preserve them. And we are not to muzzle the victim here. No way.
Children, you're going to take it personal. And he says that even if they are the least, even if they're guilty, we've got to handle these things right. Okay? So, do not receive an accusation against an elder except on the basis of 2 or 3 witnesses.
That's baloney. 100% baloney. But we already covered that. It's so wrong. That's just absolutely wrong.
Who've been eyewitnesses and will affirm they've been eyewitnesses. We had a previous leader leave, was accused of a lot of things. As soon as they left, all kinds of accusations came up. And I said to him, I will receive your accusation if you will write it, you will sign it, and then you will meet face to face with me and that person.
So Rick's saying here, there was someone that had an accusation about a former leader, and he brought it to him. And he said, no way, Jose. But if you write it down and then we go talk to him face to face, then I'll receive it. And again, that sounds like, he's meeting him in the middle, but absolutely not. You, in situations of sexual immorality and spiritual grooming, when is it okay for you to be before your abuser again with this same organization that allowed it to happen? No, Rick, no. He's got to open up his mind on. I don't think Rick's seeing all of the scenarios here. I understand, you've got someone who's got, they've got some sin, they lie a little bit, or they yell a little bit, or they're in gluttony, or whatever it may be, right? It's you can use that on some examples, but in these cases with clergy abuse, absolutely not. Absolutely not. And I don't think it's really hit home as much for him yet, because when it does, you're not going to put your family member back in harm's way. You're not going to do it. And so that's when, we'll see a double standard, because that is just so wrong. Absolutely wrong.
Person, and tell him to his face that you did this, but otherwise, if you're not willing to put your name to it, that's cowardly. You're not.
And I this is where it really hurts for me. Right now, we're villainizing the victim, and we're saying the pastor's primary responsibility is to verify all the victim facts, and pastors aren't even mildly equipped to do this. That would be a professional victim advocate. So the pastor who's in charge of the church for self-preservation's sake, for money's sake, is going to verify the facts of the victim that is against the organization and their leader? No, that's not going to happen. This is troublesome and problematic in many, many ways. And it's really sad to not paint the full picture here. Rick should see the greater breadth of trouble that is going to occur with these scenarios.
Helping a brother. I mean, we're doing this to help him.
Again, it's about restoring the leader. It's not about the victim. We're doing this to help the leader. You're like, yeah, that's amazing. Yes, that's amazing that you're thinking of your fellow pastor. But what about the victim? Do we want to run them through this ringer? Do we want to completely annihilate any type of identity they have left by putting them in front of their abuser again? to try to coerce a statement. No, I'm sorry. There's professionals that deal with victims on a regular basis. And you can't, as a pastor, entertain this concept completely.
This kind of behavior. Well, I got a lot of letters that they were willing to do that, and the person took off anyway. So we didn't. But that's the kind of accountability and all. In biblical due process, you get to face your accuser.
Again, maybe in some scenarios, but absolutely not. Absolutely not. That is not healthy. It is not. That is not what you do. I can just imagine a parent of someone who is a child who was sexually assaulted, driving them over to their perpetrator's house and bringing that child back to the place where they were just assaulted. No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. No, not in God's green earth do you do that. I'm sorry, that does not work for every transgression. It does not. And this is not a blanket verse where you apply it for every transgression. No, we got to care more about the victims here.
And there's a reason for that. In almost every case that they tell you, not face to face, not in front of the other person. If you get the other where they have to do it in front of the other person, the testimony changes.
And Rick's like, gotcha, but that's not a gotcha moment. Absolutely not. If you were put under grooming and you were sexually groomed, you were violently assaulted, there is so much at stake with your sanity, with your emotions, with your safety, that you're most definitely not going to get the right confession. You're not going to get the right solution. Your in-house leader is not going to all of a sudden own up to everything that happened if those events were taking place. That is not a healthy environment to get health, restoration, justice, healing. That's not what should take place. That is not good. It's not good at all.
Now, I would that we could dig down to this a little deeper, but a friend of ours was a Orthodox Jewish rabbi. He had to study 8 years to become a rabbi and pass incredible tests, memorize it.
This is when he pivots and starts talking. His example was interesting, but kind of studying the scenario of I think he gets into the law, the Old Testament examples. But I'm going to wrap it up here. Essentially, there's tremendous opportunity for continued conversation within the body of Christ. I appreciate Rick's heart in some of the things that he was doing, some of the things he said. But I think we have some very, very glaring problems with these blanket approaches, Galatians 6:1 and the Matthew verse, and very little underpinning and safety and security for the victims. We must not see our restoration process through a biased lens of self-preservation. We must allow the most safety and security to take place. And if you actually want truth, you're not going to investigate your own house's crimes. Thank you so much for being with me today, guys. I hope this was helpful for you. If you want, I did a big one on Mike Bickle's last sermon. Check it out. And I'm going to be doing more stuff like this down the road. But bless you. Take care.